Hello, hello, and welcome. Happy Friday. I'm excited for today's episode. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Lavinia Planka. She has dedicated her life to the study of movement and health. From a career as a mime, which I cannot wait to talk about that, and a choreographer with credits from Nickelodeon to Guggenheim, she pivoted in her 40s to becoming a somatic movement educator, and for the last 30 years has been an internationally known teacher and author, helping thousands of people move better, feel better, and live the life they want. She has created a process called Kinesa, which synthesizes movement, science, ancient wisdom, body language, and more into a joyful learning experience for pain reduction, mental clarity, and emotional resilience. Lavinia, thank you for being here today.
Wow, I am so impressed with myself. I cannot
Right?
believe.
Don't you love it when someone else reads your bio? You're like, who are you talking about?
You're like, wow, I've really lived a long time.
I know. I love that you pivoted in your 40s. I remember when I was in my 40s, I just celebrated my 60th birthday 10 days ago. We're recording this in February. So, I remember being in my 40s and I was switching jobs. And I was part of a company where two brothers owned businesses next to each other. And one of the guys who worked for the brother the brother who I worked for said to me, and the guy was probably around my age, maybe he was slightly younger, but he said to me, "You're quitting at your age?" And I thought, I was like, I don't even think I was 45. Like I wasn't even in my mid 40s, right? And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Right? But when you think about that, people have such a scarcity mindset around age, right? And to recreate yourself, because I kind of recreated myself in my 50s when I started coaching full time. So I love that. So share with the listeners your journey, because obviously it's a pretty packed one. So share, how you got from where you were to where you are today.
So you're talking about that pivot point, right?
Well, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I was just thinking about this in terms of something I wanted to write. This idea that when you get to a certain age and you look back on your life, it feels like there was a plan.
Right.
It's like, oh, that led to that and that led to that. But as I was kind of going through my life, it just felt like, oh, there I go into
Right.
this direction, right? So
Right.
I
Sometimes
always
kicking
loved,
and screaming. I don't know
right.
about you, but I've been kicking and screaming.
Well, I mean, I always loved movement from childhood, but I was a super klutz.
Mm,
And so my parents, wanting to help me, sent me to ballet school.
okay.
And, so this is the 60s. So it was like Miss Shirley and the little girls in tutus. And I
Okay.
was this like overweight kid, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And I was so expressive. I was so expressive. They could practically not get me off the stage, but I was not the world's greatest dancer. So when I went to college, and I majored in theater and I minored in dance, and it was like I was too much of a dancer to act and too much of an actor to dance. And so there's a whole long story about how I ended up becoming a mime, but it was like I found my niche. The minute I went into mime class, it was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right. Because
And
it's both, right? It's movement and acting.
it was
Yeah.
movement and acting, and it was an opportunity also for me to use. I had always wanted to write, so I was writing my own material, and the universe kept supporting it. I mean, I was touring internationally, I was doing television commercials, I was doing what people would call the dream.
Right.
But I had chronic back pain. Right.
Mm,
So I would be out on stage doing these leaps and dive rolls and all this kind of stuff. And then I'm like the walking wounded when I got off.
right.
And there came a point in my life where I was like, this can't continue because I'm going to be one of those old mimes, you
Right.
know, with like the wrinkles coming through the white face kind of thing. And I started to try to find a solution to my pain. And I went through all of the alternative things. I'm not going to bore you with all the
Right.
listings.
Right.
And I stumbled across an article by this man, Moshe Feldenkrais, who was a martial artist and an engineer, and he developed this thing called the Feldenkrais method. And he was talking about how our habitual behavior is also in our bodies. And our
Mhm.
habitual emotions are expressed through our posture and our attitudes and our pains. And it was just sort of like light bulb. It made so much sense to me that I just dove into this work and I continued performing. I continued performing until I was just almost 50. I actually even performed after that, but not officially.
Sure.
And that process, again, it was like in the beginning, I was like, what am I doing? I don't fix people. I don't, you know. And then the next thing I knew, I was teaching classes and, helping people. But I wanted to find that connection between how we express our emotions, how we use it in our bodies, and how that's connected to our sense of well-being. Not
Mm.
just health, but just, I love Moshe Feldenkrais said, health isn't the absence of illness. It's the feeling of
Yeah.
feeling good about my life, feeling good about myself. And so I just kept on studying. I kept on practicing and learning. And I took a bunch of other trainings in body language and the emotions. And then, like you, I always have had this spiritual side. I've had a meditation practice since I was in my 30s. I've gone to so many different traditions and feel enriched by all of them, some of
Mm.
which also have movement in them. Certainly yoga does, right? There's just certain ways that cultures move when they're connecting to the spirit. And I went, well, wait a minute, where's the neuroscience behind it? Why is it that for 5,000 years everyone has done this? There's a reason for it. And that became the interest that helped me develop Kinesa, because I started to think about, I'm not just a physical body, I'm an emotional body, I
Right.
have an intellectual body. And for
Spiritual
years,
body. Yeah.
yeah, and for years I taught something called the creative body because I feel like we're all creative beings. So they started to build. So now I have 7 bodies, right? And in
Okay.
addition to those, I have an archetypal body, our energetic body, and our alchemical body. And they're all there, all expressing, all at the same time. And when I can kind of dive into experience, for example, the power of a particular archetype through the hands or through the torso or something like that, it helps people become empowered in that they need.
Mm.
If they're the wounded healer, for example, how does the wounded healer work with the healer archetype? You
Right.
know, how can I be a more effective teacher archetype? Not getting my ego in the way. How is that manifested physically? So that's where I'm at this point. That is the shortest summary I've ever
Shortest.
given.
I
I
love
just want
that.
you to know
Well,
that.
you talk about the habits in our bodies, and I had in October of 23, I had my hip replaced, and in October of 24, I just had my knee replaced. So I'm still
Mhm.
recovering from that. And what I noticed before that surgery, I have, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about chronic pain, and they're like, I don't, like a lot of times when asked when did it start, because there is an emotional component, like I couldn't tell you when it started because
Mhm.
it becomes just an ache, a pain, and then you're like, this has been bothering me for a few months, oh, this has been bothering me for a few years, and you go on and on. But so you get used to it, like it just becomes second nature. But before my knee surgery, one day I was moving, I forget if I was getting out of bed or getting off a chair, and I found myself groaning, ouch, I think I said ouch, and I went, what are you doing? You're actually not in pain. But my brain is so used to always being in pain that I was responding to something that wasn't even happening. So I'm telling my body, we're in pain. We're in pain. We're in pain. When in fact, there really wasn't any pain at that moment.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, well, we need to stop that, right? Because that's just a signal to say, yes, more pain, more pain, more pain. Yeah, it
Right.
was fascinating.
The groaning thing is really interesting, isn't it? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my husband's quite a bit older than me, and it just shocked me how he would just bend over to get a fork, and he'd be like,
Right.
and I would be like, what are you doing? Why are you? And then I caught myself doing it one day, and I wondered what it has to do with my perception of fragility
Mm,
or a sense that I can't trust certain parts of myself. So it's been part of an investigation for me as well to begin to understand because look, we're all going to age.
right.
I hate to break it to you.
I know. I've been kicking and screaming a little bit this month,
Yeah,
but
well,
it
just wait until
just
you're in your 70s.
right.
And
Yeah,
you know,
that's yep.
and at the same time, I feel great. So what are those moments where it's like I don't trust that hip or will that knee give out? And how do I find the resilience to be able to continue to live the life I want,
Right.
knowing that, by age 80, we lose like 80% of our muscle mass. I mean, that's a huge amount of muscle mass
Yeah.
that's just gone, and depending on your genetics, there's the bone deterioration. So I always joke around with my clients and I say, the older you get, the more you have to exercise and the less you want to do it.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that because I used to love exercising. And obviously, in the last few years, it's been a little bit more challenging with having, the joint
Mhm.
pain and what have you. But I've been trying to get back into it very gently. And when I lift 5 pound weights and my muscles actually hurt, I'm like, what the hell is happening to my body?
Mhm.
And they're not bouncing back like before. You could work out for a week and you like the muscle memory was there. And I was like, well, this is interesting. It's just
Mhm.
not there. So it is taking hard. And you're right. I have less energy to want to do it now, but more need and desire to have to do it.
Right. So how do you find the joy? How do you find the fun in something? So I always want to stick for myself to the movement that feels supportive, that feels nourishing, that gives me energy and not torture myself. So
Right.
each person has to find that balance
What works for them. Yeah.
within. And when a person is younger, there's also, there's the whole vanity thing which as we get older, it's not that I don't have vanity. For sure, I have vanity, but I don't have the need to make that the major presentation.
Right.
We have wisdom now.
Right. I have experience. I
That's
don't
right.
need to. Yeah, I love
No,
that.
but people feel that,
Yeah.
if you own it, if
Right.
you own, again, going back to archetypes, right?
Yeah.
If you own what you've lived through, people can feel it and vibe to you just as much as if you were a sexy young thing,
Right.
maybe
Well,
even
and I
more.
think that, even the sexy young thing or the sexy thing, I'll take the young out of it. That's a mindset, right? Like you can be in sweatpants and still be sexy, and you can be here in makeup and be less sexy, right?
It's
Like
true.
it really
It's
isn't
true.
about the appearance, it's about how you feel about you internally.
Right. That's beautiful. It's like this idea of my self-image.
Mm,
And again, we move through life based on our self-image. And I don't mean self-image like, oh, I'm shy or I'm ugly, but the self-image of myself that I know where my arms are.
right.
I know where my shoulders are. I know how to support myself. And if I have a feeling that, oh, I'm just, weak or that I'm fading, that sticks with us,
Mm,
and that communicates itself to other people as well. The minute my body language is reflective of a self image of being not enough, being being a failure, being weak, all of those things. When I carry myself, I communicate to others, and then it feeds back to me.
right.
So when I make an effort to actually remember that, oh, my self image is not just I'm a nice person, but that I am clear about where my shoulders are, where my ears are, what my breath is like, how I'm using my hands. That's my self image also. And if I don't have that, then everything changes and nobody wants to talk to you, right?
It's so interesting because I had this awareness from a friend recently. We were out to lunch and we had to go up to the counter and she got there before me and she ordered her meal. And then I got to the counter and I was waiting for somebody to wait on me. And we were having lunch and she said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "What was going on when you ordered lunch?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You didn't step forward." And I was like,
Mm.
I don't even know what you're
Mhm.
talking. Like at first I was like, I'm not even sure I know what you're talking about. And she said, you do that. And I'm an extrovert. Like most people would refer to me as an extrovert. But she
Hmm.
said, I've seen you in networking events. She said, and you take a back seat. And I was like, part of me was like fascinated, but then I was like, oh shit, I'm being seen, right? But I was like, so it's actually allowed me to pay attention to how I show up. Like I mean, sometimes when you go to a new event and you don't know anyone, there's that awkwardness. And, even though I appear confident, my inner child is like, why are we with all these strangers? And will they like me and all the things?
Nobody wants to talk to
Right,
me.
exactly, right? As I'm sitting in the corner not talking to anyone. But I was like, it was fascinating because I didn't think I was actually doing, I thought I was just waiting for the woman to come over. Like at that moment, I didn't feel like I was, not feeling confident or anything. I was just being patient. But to hear someone else's perspective, and I was like, very interesting. So now it's made me aware of how I show up when I'm
Hmm.
talking to people, when I'm in groups, but you don't think others notice it, but they do.
We are animals,
Yes.
and we are constantly taking in signals from each other and from ourselves, from even smelling the way a person, wrinkles their forehead when you say something to them, what happens to the breath. There's, I don't, have you ever heard of entrainment? Do you know what entrainment means?
I feel like I have, but
So
not
entrainment is used in many different things, but it's basically when different people are together and then their rhythms start to match. Like one of
okay.
the examples, of course, is women living together. Often
Right,
their
right.
periods start to match.
Yeah.
And monks, when they're meditating, right, if you measure their breath pattern in the beginning of the meditation and at the end, by the end, everyone is breathing
Breathing
together, right?
together. Okay.
So
Yeah.
when we're with people, we are in training or not in training via
Mm,
the breath and expressions. So, you've seen couples when they're falling in love, whatever, he picks up a glass and then she picks up a glass, right? And that's entrainment. We're
yeah.
we're breathing together, we're being together, and then we know when it doesn't work, when it
Right.
doesn't jive, when there's something in our two sets of pheromones or whatever
Right,
that's
right.
not making it happen. And so when we're with people, we want to be aware not just of them, but of how I am. That moment where somebody says something and
Right.
I don't think that I'm closing off, but the animal in the other person feels it right away.
Yeah.
So how do I again going to self-image, can I be aware of myself? That's what Feldenkrais called what he did awareness through movement. Not
Mm,
awareness of movement, not awareness in movement, literally developing awareness through how I move. Sensing, for example, right now as I'm talking to you, how as I gesture to you, this is also connected to my heart, right?
right.
You know that the fourth chakra is right here. And as my emotion is expressed, it comes up out through the shoulders. And then in yoga, the chakra in the middle of the palm actually connects up to the heart. So when I'm gesturing to you, I'm speaking from my heart in that moment, and I'm inviting you into my heart, right? So all that stuff, I mean, that's where I'm talking about the science and the ancient.
Right,
It's
right.
amazing to me.
Love
When I
that.
watch people nowadays talking about body language, I want to say, I know they've been doing this for thousands of years.
Well, and I'm curious how much of that gets lost because, we're not in relationship with people anymore. We're in relationships with our phones, right? I
Uh,
used to be a professional matchmaker and a date and relationship
were
coach.
you really?
Yes,
Oh,
that's a
wow.
whole other podcast. But when I was coaching people on relationships, they would say to me, well, I was talking to this guy or I was talking to this woman. And I would say, were you actually talking to them or were you texting with them? Well, we were texting on the app. I'm like, so you weren't talking, right? Like the way that we communicate, we really believe that our texting through a phone is communication, right? And that we're building relationships that
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
So, how has that shifted the way that we interact with each other, right? That animal piece, how are we building relationships when we're actually not in relationship physically with each other?
It's a really interesting question. because I don't actually think that you can.
And
And
same, I don't either.
you
Yeah.
know, I mean, you know, all those statistics about how 90% of our communication is nonverbal,
Right.
right? So half of it is the gesture and the facial expression. Then there's the pitch of the voice, just the
Mm.
pitch of your voice, even or even the sound of your voice. You know, if I talk to you like this, I'm going to give you a different personality, right? So, so it's, and I'm not making fun.
Right.
I feel
Yeah.
that people who feel like, wow, nobody takes me seriously, think about your voice,
Yeah.
think about your posture, think about how you breathe when you're with someone. It can change everything. So when we're texting, it's not possible. You're losing 90% of your ability to understand each other. So the sooner you can meet, at least in Zoom, where you know we
Right.
can
You can
gesture to each
see.
other and see each other, the better off you're going to be in a relationship for sure.
And I think that the reading of the text or of an email isn't what, I remember when from my corporate days, somebody would be like, "Did you see that email they sent?" And I was like, "Yeah, it was fine." Right. But they read it in a certain way because it hit some trigger on them. And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. They just said blah, 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 blah." Right. So we're interpreting a text or an email from our perspective, not the
Mhm.
perspective of how it was sent to.
Right, right. And it happens a lot. I mean, it happens when we're communicating to each other too.
Right.
Like, you know, someone will say, "Well, I didn't think you were really listening to me because you kept looking off," you know? And
Yeah.
that other person would be like, "Oh my God, no, I was thinking about what to say to you."
Right.
So again, it's this awareness of how I'm connecting with somebody.
Yeah, my husband and I, many years ago, I don't know, probably 15 years ago now, we had a conversation where I said, you never plan anything. And he was like, every time I do, you tell me it's wrong. And I'm like, I've never said that, right? But what I said was, oh, you want chicken? I really felt like steak. Okay, I guess I could have chicken, right? Me verbally processing it, he heard I did it wrong. And I was
Mhm,
like, this is fascinating, right? Because
mhm,
that's how he interpreted it. And I was like,
mhm,
but I never said that, right? But it made me aware. But that's how our communicate. We had to at the time our communicators was 15 years ago before either one of us were doing any kind of personal development work, right? But that led me to really realize like what I say and how it is perceived can be very different things,
mhm.
right? Yeah.
Especially with your partner.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Because
it's
you
just
know that's where we do most of our work, right? Is in relationship.
it's those moments where he's turned into my mother, I've turned into his mother.
Right.
You know, how we learn to listen to each other so that these, you know, and there's always going to be those moments of like, well, you said, and me going, I did? Did I
Right.
really say that? Oh, okay. I
Yeah, if
said
you say
that.
so, because that's what you
Yeah.
heard, right?
Right.
That's what you heard.
Right,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's our life's work.
Yeah, it is. I had a client once when I was doing the date and relationship coaching. She was like, "All right, I feel great. Now I need to get into a relationship to get triggered so I can work on what's next." And I was like, "All right, let's do this." So let's talk a little bit more about the Kanisa, right? Am I
Mhm.
pronouncing it right? The Kanisa
Yes, you
process,
are. Yes.
right?
Practice makes
So
perfect.
who do you work with? Like why are people coming to you? And what exactly, can you elaborate a little bit more on what the process is and how it helps?
So it's what we call somatic movement education, right? So it's using the body to learn about myself. So most of the time when people come to see me one on one, you know, I guess you could call me a movement coach in a
Okay.
way, but because of my years as a practitioner, it's kind of interesting to shift the language. So most of the time when people come to see me one on one, it's because of pain
Okay.
or some emotional duress that has not been solved by traditional psychotherapy.
Mm,
And when I say people come because of pain, also 90% of the time, physical therapy did not help.
yeah.
And, you know, I mean, because basically, you know, no one's heard of what I do. It's not covered by insurance and it's not cheap.
Right.
So they're coming
But it's
based,
worth it. It's well worth it.
well, totally worth it. I
Yeah.
know that because I've had a good practice for however many years. It's been
Right,
30
right.
years. So they come with that initial situation, right? And so we begin by working on becoming aware of the pattern around the pain. Many times I don't even address the actual act of pain that's happening because often the source is not where the result is.
Right.
So we start looking at patterns, number one, how you hold yourself, in your pelvis or in your leg, wherever it is. And they start to discover where habitual holdings are, where tensions have come up, where protection and compensation has taken place that has kind of skewed the entire body in order to continue to facilitate the repetition of the pain.
Mm.
So that's the first thing that we do is develop awareness of how you have compensated for yourself or how you have increased the pain or how you are supporting the pain. Then, depending on the person, and a lot of it depends. Like some people, like a golfer is going to come in, he's not going to want to hear about the fact that he's not tuning into his first chakra as he swings. He
Right,
wants to
right.
he wants to know the move.
Right. How do I make my swing better and not
What's
her?
getting in my way of my move,
Right.
and so we'll talk about, well, what happens if you don't clench your jaw? What happens if you, explore rotation in a different direction? But if I'm working with someone who comes in and says, I'm really sad, and it's just, I'm so sad about how things hurt me. I'm so sad about, and as we're working and I feel the tension in the person, I I can sometimes say, okay, this is not just sadness, there's rage, or there's grief,
Mm.
or there's trauma that they haven't told me about. I never say, oh, tell me about your traumas. You
Right,
know,
right.
what happened to you as a child? But I can feel it in parts
Mm.
and it starts to emerge. Now, sometimes people will never, ever tell me what happened to them because it's none of my business.
Right.
But all of a sudden, there's this something that they realize, this freedom, this letting go, this revelation. And that to me is where Kanisa can then take them. If I see that, for example, a big breath happens and their arms come out, I think, okay, there's fourth chakra healer, an emotion that's coming out, or suddenly their voice changes,
Mm.
right? So you realize that all this time they've had constriction in their throat because they were told to shut up as a child or whatever. And all of a sudden they have this deep resonant voice. And you can see it in their faces. They're like, whoa, I sound different.
Oh, wow.
Or whatever it is. So to me, it's taking the principles of awareness through movement. I also do work with people one-on-one using touch, which is an aspect of the Feldenkrais method, where I literally put my hands on parts and guide the movement so that the person doesn't even have to do movement on their own. But when I teach Kinesa to students, I stick to the verbal part for a
Okay.
number of reasons. But I do think that using the proper use of language can help a person feel more empowered in healing themselves
Absolutely.
instead of being dependent on a body worker to move them, right?
Right.
So I love using words to help guide a person so that they have their own personal aha, as opposed to, oh, look what you did to me, you know?
Mm.
It's just so cool. And
I
then
love
and
that.
then and then as transformation, as levels of transformation happen, people start discovering their own relationship to their emotional body, to the thought processes in their intellectual body. When we talk physical body, and a lot of times when I begin, we start with physical body, anatomy, what's going on in the elbow. Why do what that's a tendonitis you have going on there. But then it turns out that the tendonitis might be related to an injury that they had 10 years ago in their shoulder when they were having a fight with somebody and fell down the stairs. And even though this healed, the trauma never left.
Right.
The sadness never left over that fight. So that's the process of the work. It's incredible how much we carry the
In our,
stories we carry in our bodies.
yeah.
Every single part of us is carrying, again, going back to Moshe Feldenkrais, he used to say, there is no mind-body connection. Your mind is your body. Your
Mm.
body
Oh,
is your mind.
right.
I used to call it
It's not
instant
an either
messaging.
or, it's an
You know,
and.
I
Yeah.
used to talk about your body's instant messages back when AOL existed,
Yeah.
this idea that it's like instantaneous because we're a
Right.
system. You are a
Yeah.
system. You're not a head and arms and legs. It's all one thing, you know?
Yeah, I'm an EFT practitioner.
Hmm.
So, you said that you use their words, right? And I'm like, it's so powerful when I'm, having a session with a client and it's their words and then they go, "Oh, I mean, I've even had it in my own personal experience. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? That's what this is about?" Because when you're tapping, it takes you out of your head.
Right.
And, I think you mentioned, I can tell you it's tendonitis, but I can't tell you about the emotion that's attached to it because we're so much more connected to our physical. And I think as a society, the emotional piece, right? Like it isn't okay to have emotions, right? It's not, it may not be safe to feel it. Like a child falls. I say this all the time. How often do you see a kid fall and the parents say, "You're fine, you're okay. Don't cry, you're fine." Instead of saying, cry your eyes out, have your feel, be in your feels, right? So we grow up to be adults where we push everything aside. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for grief. I don't have time for sadness. I don't have time for anger. I remember when I was in healing school, we did an exercise on anger, and I was like, I'm not angry. Like, what are we? And we were hitting a tennis racket on one of the healing tables, right, to get it out. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And then somebody said, "Well, what are you angry about?" And what came out was my mother dying. And my mother died when she was 48. And it was right before I turned 26. And I was like, what a horrible person I am. I'm angry that my mother died. And the teacher asked everyone in the circle, who else is angry somebody died? And everyone raises their hands. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with you people? Like I had so much judgment like that I couldn't be angry about it.
Hmm.
Right. But I put a lot of pressure on, like I had to grow up quicker and I had responsibilities and all the things. And underneath that, and I'm realizing this at my mother died in 1991. What was that, 34 years ago? Right. So I've lived more than half my life without her than I did with her. But turning 60 is bringing all that up because she never got to be, like 60 is a new phase of your life. Right.
Hmm.
And in the last year, as I was coming up on this, I was really fascinated. I've never had an issue with my age, but this past year it really hit me. And as I've uncovered, it's really unprocessed grief that's really coming up that I just didn't process back then. Because back
Hmm.
then I was much more in my head. I had shit to do. Right? I didn't have time for, I didn't even know what a feeling was, right? But we don't create space for us to have those feelings either.
Hmm. And when we have them, we judge ourselves.
And others
And
judge too,
and
right?
and and but the other thing is that we also don't know how to make use of the experience,
Right. How
right?
to process it, what to do with
So,
it.
yeah, so I feel this anger as a result of, abuse as a child. And like I can walk around being wounded for the rest of I was abused as a child. And, I could be really angry at my dad. And I was really angry
Sure.
at my dad. But at the same time, how can I then recognize how this anger has kept me tight in my lower back? Again, going back to,
Yeah.
now we're going back to my origin story. But,
Right.
how much of that feeling of being inadequate, feeling shame, feeling all of these other things that I didn't even understand were happening to me, then I feel it, then I want to move on.
Hmm.
I want to move on to be a fully realized human being,
Right.
to recognize that, the story's going to come back. The story, it's like we live the same story in cycles in our lives. And I feel like that's, why was I put on this planet? I was put on this planet maybe to have these experiences and then come back and recognize, oh, there I am again. I went into my shame cycle. I went into, my I'm not good enough cycle. And but now I'm at a different place. I can see
Yeah.
it differently. I can feel it in my body differently. It's not like down in my glutes where he spanked me. Now it's moved area of my solar plexus where it's like I'm defiant and I want to breathe through, right? So to me, that's the process that is so exciting, that as we get older, if we pay attention, we actually can get wiser,
Right.
you know, and we can be happier. I'm sure you've seen the statistics that, after 70, most people are happier than they were when they were 30. Certainly I am,
Right.
you know.
A lot less stress. Um, I love, I have this belief that like, I don't know that our triggers ever completely go away, but I think with work, we respond differently to them. Like you said,
Right,
you're like, oh, this is information, right?
right,
Like we don't, making it wrong is making us wrong. But if we
right,
just go, oh, this is information. Okay, what do I want to do with this information? What is
right.
this here to teach me? What is this here to share with me?
And when I have more awareness of my inner state, I also, I think, become better at recognizing the origins or the beginnings of a trigger. In other words, catching it in action instead of being triggered and then going, oh no, here I am again,
Right.
right? There's more of a sensitivity to the environment, to the situation, to my own inner state where I can feel, okay, I'm starting to claw, I'm starting to feel what's going on, and to recognize that, someone said something that triggered it, or there's a smell, or
Right. Yeah.
whatever it is, and I can bring myself back to homeostasis, right? To feeling more centered in myself.
Mm,
And that's what I call emotional fluency,
I
right?
love
This
that.
ability to be able to know an emotion is coming in, to be able to process it, and then to be able to continue to be effective in my life.
Yeah. Because we still have to function. Yeah. So for those that are new to somatic movement, what
Mhm.
advice would you give to someone maybe to begin exploring and benefiting from these practices?
Of course, it all depends on the person.
Sure.
Again, where you're attracted, because if you think about it, yoga is somatic movement
Yeah.
education. It is a way
Dancing
of getting.
is
Sure,
dancing.
everything. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I think that everything you do that's movement that involves learning
Mm,
is somatic movement education. The only time it's not is when it's become mechanical, when it's become habitual and you're not learning anything anymore. So to me, it's about the learning process. So it depends on the person. There are so many different now somatic movement educate. There's a whole branch that is involved with dance, right? There are things like authentic movement and soul dancing and chakra dancing. And, so if dancing is a thing that gives, that feeds you and makes you feel more alive, that's one direction. Then there's the work with sort of improving your function, right? So there's things like the Feldenkrais method, somatics, body mind centering. These are all different approaches. The Alexander technique, maybe you've heard of that. They all have different ways. And I always say to people, look, somatic movement education methods are kind of like Baskin Robbins. There's like
hmm,
52 flavors.
right.
And so you taste an ice cream, and just because you taste that ice cream and you don't like that one, you don't never have ice cream again.
Right.
Try another one. Try another one. I mean, before I discovered the Feldenkrais method, like I said, I tried many different approaches to try to understand how to work with my own relationship to my body. So there are teachers everywhere at this point. And the beauty, I mean, you could say COVID was a gift in some
Yeah.
ways because
Yep.
it created an opportunity for people to experience somatic movement education online in areas where there are no teachers. I
Right.
mean, I've been teaching online for like over a dozen years. And so I felt like, okay, I'm ready for
Everyone,
this.
everyone's finally caught up with
It
me.
was
Yeah.
it was wonderful. And it continues to be wonderful. But some people like an in-person class. So, just I would say Google somatic movement education and your city and see what's there and see if there's a Feldenkrais teacher or a NIA class or whatever kind of speaks to you so that you can begin to start to integrate movement. So Feldenkrais method lessons and the Kinesa process as well uses really kind of small, smooth, slow, for the most part, movements that allow you to take the time to pay attention to yourself.
Mm,
If you go to something like Nia, then you're putting dance on top of these principles. So sometimes you're not necessarily feeling the principles as much as you're feeling the movement as a result of the principles. Depends on what kind of rocks your world, you know?
right. Are there credentials or recommendations you would suggest? Obviously, they should come see you, but if they want
If you're in
to,
Asheville, please come on
right. But you
by.
also do it virtually, right?
I
You
do.
see
I do.
clients
I do have
virtually.
virtual
But
classes,
are
yes.
there things that they should be looking for in a teacher or trainer? Because I would imagine, or practitioner, because I would imagine there's also you're working with the physical and the emotional body. So you want somebody who's qualified to be able to hold
Mhm.
space for you as you work through whatever is going to come up. So are there
So,
things that you would encourage people to look for?
sure. I mean, again, I'm not saying that every single person in the world who's certified is
Sure.
qualified.
Right, right.
There are many graduates of many programs who would like run the other way because they got certified, but they've never really like walked their talk.
Sure.
So again, it's about auditioning the people.
Yeah.
But yes, if you see somebody has after their name, certified, guild certified Feldenkrais practitioner or mind body centering practitioner or, something where it's a legitimate training, that's a good place to start.
Okay.
Registered yoga therapist is a good place to start. Those are
Going to your
definitely.
website is also a very good place for them to start.
Well, coming to my website, you'll have a lot of resources because there's free lessons there to try out.
And
There,
we're gonna put that link in the show notes. You have a freebie that you're offering where they can I think it's 3 different lessons to do relieve back
this, I
pain and
think it's
shoulder.
this. I, I think it was the self-image. Oh no, it's the unstressed through movement
Yes. Yeah.
thing. Right, exactly, which is beautiful because they're short.
Okay.
A lot of times the lessons themselves go 45 minutes to an hour. These are shortened versions so that it gives people an opportunity to sample a little bit
Yeah.
and feel it. So yeah, definitely. I love the Unstressed Through Movement program. And like I said, I have tons of cheap downloads on my website if people want to get into it from that point of view. There's lots of material to read and then resources that they can kind of go deeper in different directions.
Nice.
And I have a whole section on emotions in there,
Okay.
so they can go into that as well.
Perfect. Um, I could probably talk to you forever about this, but as we start to wrap up, I always love to ask this question. What is something you live by that you want to share with our listeners?
I It's interesting that you ask that question because it's something that I think about a lot. And that is, to me, the most valuable thing in the world is to stay in touch with my own authenticity, to not
Mhm.
try to be someone else, to not try to please someone else by not being myself. I'm not saying that I go out and be rude or anything like that,
Right.
but that if I am not listening to the core, to me, authenticity comes from here, from my
Mm.
gut. And if I feel in my gut that something's not right, I will examine it. I'm not going to run away because maybe sometimes what I'm feeling is not right because I'm scared.
Right.
But to trust my own authentic self and not try to put on an act or try to be somebody else. Kind of ironic coming from somebody who comes from the theater, right? But I wanted to always be authentically
Right.
myself, even when I was not acting like myself.
Yeah.
And
Well, and you were authentic I would imagine when you were acting, you were authentic in that role, right?
of
You were,
course, yeah.
yes, yes,
I
I
was
love
just making
that.
a joke. Yeah,
Oh,
not
thank
to
you
me.
so much, Lavinia. This has been such a great conversation.
I so appreciate you inviting me.
Yes. Well, I always love to end with I pulled three cards before we got on, and today I pulled the Soul Coaching deck by Denise Lynn. I don't look at the cards beforehand, and oftentimes there's some theme to the conversation that we've had. So there's three cards in front of me. There's one on the right, center, and left. So I'm going to let you choose, and I'm going to have the listeners also choose.
So I should pick one of those.
Yes, right, center, or left.
Left.
All right, left. Wisdom. All I truly need is within me.
There you go.
And if you chose center, peace. I breathe deeply, knowing that all is well in my universe. And if you chose right, communication. I communicate from my heart, and love surrounds and protects me. And we talked about that, right?
We talked about that and wisdom. The
Right?
peace part, I'm working on the peace part. Thank you for
The
that.
peace. I know, I know. Oh, thank you so much for this conversation, Lavinia. I really enjoyed it. And for those of you listening, thank you for joining me today on this journey towards a more enlightened and fulfilling life. I really hope that today's episode has inspired you to embrace your inner wisdom and navigate your path with a renewed sense of purpose. Remember, transformation begins from within. Take a moment each day to connect with your higher self, with your body, and trust that the universe is guiding you towards your highest good. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, do all the things that you need to do to help promote us, and share it with others that may help. This may help. You can find all of mine and Lavinia's contact information, social media links, websites, all that in the show notes. And for now, continue to shine your light and walk in peace and love. I am Francine Terrell, and this has been Effin' Fridays with Francine. Lavinia, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.